So in this book, in chapter 1, we're going over and confronting why whitewashing must be confronted and why it must be stopped. Those are the first two sub chapters in this book, and I want to touch on that um, real quick. Why, Brandon? I think you addressed it a little bit. Why we must confront it, and then we need to address why we gotta. You got anything you want to add to that? Anything?
No, that's good. I mean, it's just um, Christianity has a rich history all over the world, and obviously the genesis of it is in with the Jewish people,
Mm-hmm.
and the Jewish people evangelizing to those who are around, and we know that um, the Ethiopian eunuch, we know that story in Acts, and how the gospel has reached all corners of the world at this point in our lives, but it also reached, as we have read, it reached many parts of Africa before, centuries before it even got to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So we have record of Northern Africans, and especially when you talk about Northern Africa, people will say, well, it wasn't in Western Africa, but we have some resources now that show that it was in Western Africa before the transatlantic slave trade during the time of Mansa Musa as well, and which meaning that not everybody obviously was a Christian before they came over here, but that many of these tribes had been evangelized by Christian and Muslim evangelists at the time. So um, to address the stumbling block in our community, why it must be confronted is because it's just another domino to knock down on why you won't submit to Christ, or why uh, people leave the church. And we never really got straightforward answers about Christ not being white, or Christ is but also Christ not being a black man as well. He's not a black man like us, a man of color. And
Right.
ultimately, what we're doing is evangelizing Christ, the one who came to save all humanity. The gospel
Mm-hmm.
really has nothing. It actually has everything to do with our ethnicity, because he encompasses all of it in the New Testament, and then
Mm-hmm.
still, grafted people in the Old Testament who were not a part of the chosen people.
Right.
So it must be confronted, because we all have dignity. And I think that books like this are written because, on the flip side of us confronting, whitewashing, that there has been a deliberate attempt to erase people of color from the scriptures in order to provide a narrative of control, and to provide a degrading narrative as well to people that they will want to put underfoot. And by they, we all know what I mean by they. So
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean we don't stand in solidarity with white Christians and Indian Christians all around the world, I mean, Muslim nations who are Christians and things like that, Mexican Christians. But what we're saying is that this is a real thing. So people feeling this way they're not pulling it out of anywhere. This is actually what has happened, and we're here to just elaborate on the true and risen Christ of Scripture,
Right.
who does not
Exactly.
discriminate, does not even have a concept of race in it, just more ethnicity. But
Mm-hmm.
here we are as a part of this social construct, and now a lot of people think that, or use an excuse to say that because Christ was white and these white men gave us the Bible, and the Bible was, I've heard all kind of stuff. Bible was written by all white men, things of that nature. This is why it must be confronted.
Right. Yeah, I've heard it before. I don't get it much from any, I know that they cite the Hebrew Israelites and a lot. We talked about them a little bit in the last episode. But I know Jerome Gay cites the Cambridge Dictionary when he talks about the whitewashing, and his definition from the Cambridge Dictionary is an attempt to stop people from finding out the truth. He had that in his book. So we know from growing up and having our history, the church taught us our history. Like our parents never told us that the that Christ was white or that the disciples were white. You gave us the context and what we were learning. We were learning about the Hebrew people, the Jewish people, that their tradition, their culture. And I think in reading this book, if we focus in more on that part, that aspect of the Jewish people aspect, and then being grafted in, as you said, Brandon, we could hopefully eliminate some of this misconception of that Christianity is a white man's religion. I'm gonna get in here into the book real quick. I did put some notes down, and it talks about a little bit about like class whitewashing, historical whitewashing. When it says historical whitewashing occurs when a particular biblical characters are presented as white men and women in literature, from childhood books all the way up into seminary. And then class whitewashing occurs when we regulate people of color in scripture and history that are slaves and almost exclusively slaves. That comes from the book too. So we're trying to dispel that part about Christianity being a white man's religion, when we know that it was used to keep us enslaved or keep people enslaved, but they pulled out parts of the Bible that made them look like they were supposed to be the superior masters at that time. And he did address that in this book as well.